As you know, we are starting Unit 2. That's going to have two parts. Part 1 will deal with the United States Constitution, and Part 2 will deal with the two-party system. Again, we're going to try to keep this short here and really just cover one slide. Um, but to start out with, let's just talk about what a constitution is. In many ways, a constitution is a social contract, as we will come to learn. Again, we could trace this to the ideas of John Locke, who talks about why did governments originate, or the origins of government. And his theory was in a social contract theory. That being that people make contracts with governments. And we talked about this, if you recall, with the Declaration of Independence, um, that people felt they were born with three natural rights: life, liberty, and property, according to Locke. Um, and that for the most part, people are rational. They respect people's rights, their natural rights. However, usually there's a few bad apples among us, and so for Locke, governments are instituted to ensure that those natural rights are protected from the few that sort of don't act right. And that's really the only reason why. And so, in many ways, a constitution, being a social contract, does a lot of things, but ultimately it is this document that one defines the powers of government. All right. And it's important to define the powers of government because essentially it creates this notion known as limited government. Because if the powers are defined, then it says what government can do. And once government starts to do things outside of what is defined, you know it is overstepping its power. Um, and again, one thing when you study history, limited government, really important concept that started to really come around the 1800s with ultimately a constitution being the highest or the best way, at least many theorists believe, to limit government. Because again, if you define powers, then you're essentially limiting government. So, with that being said, this is our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, but it's not our first Constitution. Um, when we go here, we see something called the Articles of Confederation, established in 1777, which, if you recall, the Declaration of Independence being written in 1776. So this is 1 year after the Declaration of Independence, as we are caught up in the American Revolution. All right. This Constitution, this being our first Constitution, ultimately was a wartime document that was to unite all the colonies together, right? So that, and its sole purpose was focused on getting us through the war, right? And it was very successful in that. Again, uniting all the colonies together so that they could defeat the British. However, once the war is over, we are now being governed by a document that was really designed to get our country through war. And with that being said, many shortcomings started to sort of pop up, right? Um, where we noticed that, yeah, it helped us with war, but it didn't help us with trade. And it didn't help us understanding how we should relate to one another as states, and a lot of other issues such as taxation. None of these things were ever really addressed in this document because at the time when it was created to address the war, those things really weren't important. But as the country starts to begin, these matters become very important, very quick. All right, and so let's just go over this one slide here, and then we will be done. All right. But again, the Articles of Confederation, created in 1777, is our country's first constitution, right? And a constitution is being a national body of laws, all right, for the United States. It failed because it created a weak government, a weak, limited federal government. And let's just stop there for 1 second. And we'll discuss this a little bit more in class. But the difference between the Articles of Confederation and our current U.S. Constitution is that it shifted a lot of power away from the states and gave it to the federal government. Okay, so again, the Articles of Confederation, a document that more empowered the states. The states had what we might call sovereignty. They were supreme. that each state was almost like its own little country. Okay, but they were all sort of. But it was so in many ways, people will describe the Articles of Confederation as creating a loose league of friendship. A loose friendship of states, we might say. That states that ultimately were sovereign in charge of all their own affairs, but they were united. Where when we actually get to the U.S. Constitution, it breaks up that confederacy where the states are ultimately in control of their affairs and gives it to a central national government. And that's a really important concept that we'll come to talk about. So just always remember that the Articles of Confederation created a weak, limited federal government. Ultimately, each state wanted to maintain sovereignty, as I said, control over the central government. All right. And really, we're just going to stop there for today, and we will pick up with this on Monday. Have a good day, class.